Thank you, Anna. Because you're speaking on behalf of an organisation, you've got 10 minutes to give your submission today. We will keep to time as best we can, so if you do want to leave some time for questions that the committee may have for you, then make sure you leave some time. So over to you for your 10 minutes.
Thank you. I've been a solicitor for almost 30 years and I operate Feminist Legal Clinic, which is a community legal service based in Sydney. We have around 200 members and we are the Australian country contact for the International Women's Human Rights Campaign, which has over 20,000 signatures worldwide, including over 500 from Australia and over 150 from New Zealand. And all these signatories are concerned about attempts like this to change the definition of what it is to be a woman. With this legislation, you are further undermining the hard-won protections fought for by generations of feminists, from women's toilets to women's refuges, court safe rooms, any kind of quotas or affirmative action measures. These are simply unenforceable if you continue with these kinds of legislative changes. I appreciate there are people with some very good intentions advocating for this, but they have been misled by an extraordinarily well-orchestrated global propaganda campaign. Mutilating and sterilising children is not good. Undermining women's spaces and services is not good. Erasing lesbians is not good. Skewing crime statistics and media reporting is not good. And shutting down free speech and hounding feminists is not good. This change in the law will not encourage acceptance of gender non-conformity. Instead, it will reinforce sexist stereotypes of how one must behave to be considered male or female. Increasingly young people are feeling obliged to have medical interventions to change their sex if they feel they don't fit in. Many women are being sacked, censored or otherwise disciplined for questioning trans ideology. Many are lesbians who strongly support gender non-conformity. These are honest women who understand basic biology and the importance of defending women and children's safety, spaces and services and freedom of speech. We have been called on to support and represent various health professionals, many distressed parents, a radio newsreader, academics, students, a soccer player, social workers, a women's swimming club, breastfeeding counsellors and lesbian activists. We've been defending one case for almost 4 years. It would take more time than I have to detail the many distressing situations and legal inconsistencies that this kind of legislation creates, so I'll focus on one aspect in particular. Prior to lockdown, our service hosted a support group for parents distressed by the harm done to their children when fast-tracked onto puberty blockers, which are almost invariably followed by cross-sex hormones and in some cases surgical interventions. It's not just children who are victims though. Many older teenagers and young adults are also very vulnerable. We have taken instructions from one young woman who started taking opposite sex hormones at 19 after only a single consultation with a psychiatrist, and then went on to have a mastectomy and hysterectomy all by the age of 21. No one took the time to explore her history of trauma and other mental health issues before fast-tracking her onto these irreversible interventions. 10 years on, and she is not in a good place. She has come to deeply regret this decision and has undone the changes she made to her birth certificate. But she can never undo the changes to her body. A national law firm is currently preparing a medical negligence claim on her behalf and as well as for others, but no amount of money will compensate these young people for what they have lost. Recent research conducted by clinicians at Westmead Children's Hospital in Sydney found high rates of adverse childhood experiences and comorbidities such as autism in those presenting with gender dysphoria, which suggests a need for ongoing therapeutic work rather than hasty hormonal interventions that characterise the current gender affirmation model. Other research records an exponential increase of gender dysphoria in children, particularly in girls, and particularly in the vicinity of gender clinics, which suggests it spreads as a form of social contagion. Various international developments indicate a reversal in aside from the ongoing case of Bell versus Tavistock and the Cass review in the United Kingdom, there have been changes to the treatment guidelines issued by Finland and Sweden, and words of caution from the clinical pioneers of the original Dutch protocol upon which the affirmation model was originally based. By passing this legislation, the New Zealand Parliament is continuing to promote an ideology which appears to be rapidly losing favour in those progressive parts of the world where it was first introduced. You will also be breaching a duty of care to the vulnerable because it is foreseeable that many young people will be misled into believing that it is possible to change sex. Legislation has an educative effect, and with this legislation you'll be encouraging parents and children to use chest binding and puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and surgeries to address feelings of gender dysphoria. Many of my lesbian colleagues are distraught knowing that had gender affirmation been available when they were young, they too would have mutilated and sterilised themselves. This is not about being one's authentic self. This is about encouraging young people to believe they can live a lie while becoming lifelong customers for Big Pharma. I know that many people, including politicians, health professionals and journalists, have invested their hopes and credibility in a flawed model and are having difficulty changing course. I know that despite the increasing accounts by detransitioners, extensive censorship and skewed media reporting means that many members of government and the public generally are unaware of the extent of the harm that is being done by trans ideology. It takes many years for these people to overcome their shame and speak out. I'm talking about detransitioners there. But I understand that you have probably heard a lot of stories about how these medical interventions and legislative changes to assist people to change sex can save lives. I'm here to tell you that they are destroying lives, and if you want to save lives, you need to throw out this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Have we got any questions from the committee? Yes, one from Dr. Elizabeth Kitty.
Kia ora, Anna, thank you for your submission. It's just, I think, just a quick comment. I just wanted to reassure you that it's actually very difficult to get hold of puberty blockers in our country. You have to go through quite a few hoops, even if you've got parents who are supportive of a young person wanting to explore things and uphold. That's actually quite difficult, but also much harder even to do access gender affirming surgery. So I just wanted to respond to that part of.
My client started the cross-sex hormones at the age of 19, and it's taken 10 years. I mean, it's the lag time for people to realise it was a mistake is quite long. There's a lot of shame wrapped up in it. It's a bit like sexual abuse. I mean, it's on average 23 years for people to come forward. So I mean, we're going to see a bit of a lag, but they're already coming forward, some of these people, and I think the government needs to take heed of this, that you're going to be creating a future, mess of litigation. And I mean, by the government passing this legislation, you are giving a thumbs up to this ideology. You're saying to people it is possible to change sex. And of course, I agree with other speakers. I mean, it's also just, there's so many reasons. I can't begin to tell you why it's not working. The cases that I'm running all the time, we can't get them into the media. One, because of court orders, client confidentiality. People are very frightened of being persecuted. And also media. The media doesn't want to report. That the Press Council in Australia, for instance, won't allow negative media reporting. And I mean, this is factual. I mean, and yet you cannot get these stories into the media. So people don't know how much harm this is causing. And it's whether it's in amateur sport or women's refuges or all sorts of things are happening. And of course, the whole jail situation is another one. And you're not hearing about it. So it worries me that when you're making these decisions, and of course what's happening with detransitioners is probably the most distressing, because there's no going back for them.
I've got a question from Nicola Gregg.
That's a lie.
Hi Anna, you talked about a couple of countries and jurisdictions who were reversing or dialing back on legislations that they've passed. Have you got some examples of where they're making, of what changes they're making?
Yeah, the Carol Sinker Hospital, which is the major hospital dealing with this in Sweden. I mean, I could send things through if that would help the committee, but that's in Sweden, that they've issued different treatment guidelines. They're certainly stopping. I mean, I'm happy to hear what the doctor says about the fact that puberty blockers are not readily available in New Zealand, because they are, of course, a gateway drug to the cross-sex hormones, because as the Kerr case showed, if once they go on puberty blockers, almost all of them then do go on to cross-sex hormones. So it isn't as harmless as their parents are told. And of course there are other medical effects. So I'm glad at least in New Zealand children aren't being fast-tracked. But I mean, the cross-sex hormones themselves, I mean, there's plenty, a 19-year-old who has, autism and some learning disabilities is a very vulnerable person, and it's a very difficult time in life. And the Trans Hub in Australia tells children or young people not to worry about getting any mental health assessment, that the GP is enough. They can just go straight on to the hormones. So they're not...
I think you may have misinterpreted my question. I'm asking which countries are dialing back on legislation they've passed, and what are the parts?
Finland, with the Cohere principles, and Sweden, the Karolinska Hospital, and also the pioneers of the Dutch Protocol have spoken out saying that more research needs to be done, because when they came up with the affirmation model, they had a very small number of young people that this was applicable to, and now they've seen this huge burst in numbers, and they're going, whoa, everyone's really relying too heavily upon the affirmation model. When we came up with that, we were really just looking at a very small number. So they have also. So I could send you links. I can't put them in the chat at the moment, so I don't have them in front of me. But I can provide that to the committee if that would help you.
Thanks, Anna. We have gone over time now, so we will need to finish the time, but thank you for submitting to us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we've got Alan Gray. Okay, so Alan will be joining us.